from the recent chapter, we actually find out that Wed has a really unique connection to Erza that I don't think that has been really talked too much about, but at the same time is something that I'm really hoping that he brings up. And that's the fact that Erza, though human, and though her mother was a human that became a dragon, Erza developed realistically and almost entirely inside of a dragon's womb. Because we know that Irene suppressed the progress of her pregnancy while she was imprisoned to protect Erza and obviously to protect her body in that state. But after she became a dragon, as far as we know, like, she was still in some state of, of progress. Because at the point where Irene turns into like her normal body, in quotes, she's using transformation magic. So like in theory, even if you were like 8 months pregnant, if you use transformation magic, you'd still be able to have the functional like look and body of it, but it'd be only under magic effects. In reality, like if someone broke the spell, you go back to normal. But it's like, it's like a full effect magic illusion kind of transformation. So at the same time, this would mean that like she grew up long and progressed. I keep saying progressed and developed inside of a dragon's womb. And Wed, though he grew up, again, the same thing. Well, he grew up with a human mother and a dragon father. He developed inside of a human's body, and his father was a dragon, but it was in his human form. And I'm really hoping that we find out through Wed's backstory, maybe something that like there's some specific thing about people like this, maybe like a dormant power that he had, and that's why he's so strong. Like, oh, you should be able to draw out these genes, and maybe it's just specifically like the strength aspect of a dragon, and it's why Erza has been like physically strong, even though she's a wizard, more so than average wizards like her. And Erza eventually kind of goes into that and like is able just to apply that directly in her swordsmanship, maybe gain like sharper senses, something that it's like a boost that is specific to her, because everybody also has areas that are unique in how they can progress. Like obviously, anybody who's a slayer, like, progress literally in slaying, like get further progressed slayer force form. Like I say, because we have dragon force. I wish we would get official name for whatever grades is called, but stuff like that. Gray could get something in addition. Lucy has like Stardress mixes, like, can do more keys. Like she could easily also do a third one and gain something like that. Erza, I've always thought that like, Erza would gain more enchants from different types of people in the guild, because like realistically, the what she would need to do is learn the most basic kind of attributes of like a type of magic. Like say she learned giant magic from Makarov and just learned it into a sword, where she had a sword that right at the last second it became a mega sized sword, so you just gained all of that power and just dropped it at at a point where your opponent isn't expecting it, but also like the shift of weight would probably be crazy. And then on top of that, like ideas like that, but if it's not going to be like that, would it be something kind of like a secret genetic thing? Because I've always thought it would make a lot of sense if Erza had some power that was connected to that other people don't have. Because as far as we know, like, we don't know anything about any of the other characters' direct births. Like Makarov is kinda, yeah, but there's nothing special about his. Lucy's mother, as far as nothing happened crazy while she was pregnant. We know that she didn't do anything until long after Lucy was born, and there were no crazy things that happened at that point. And all the Dragon Slayer children were born to normal parents, again, as far as we know, orphaned before they're picked up by a dragon. So there's nothing kind of like crazy in terms of their backstories for some form of heritage like thing, except for Erza. But it's not like in a bloodline long going. It's more of something that would be directly caused from one of their parents. And Wed is like in a spot where I think it'd be really cool for Urza's progression to have, because I think with Erza it'd be really cool to see what we could like have further progress of her, of like relatively of anything of like the plot line of Irene. Because you could have something where she learns about like some of Wed's backstory, a little bit like Wed's stance with Ignia, because unlike a lot of the other situations in the verse where like a character is with their parents in some way, shape, or form, Ignia doesn't seem to have like a negative stance on Wed. It doesn't, like, again, we only have like the one moment so far, and Wed is like looking up, talking to him, but he calls him, because he says like, right, dad, and just looks at him, and Ignia is just looking down at him. He's smiling. He doesn't say anything evil. He doesn't look like he has anything like a look of disapproval. He seems fine. And the fact that he's second in command of the guilds after Bestia, I would assume that like they have a fair standing between each other. It's just like, what is the problem between them? I'm wondering if like the whole thing about like being a human and not having, not being a dragon while Ignia is his father is more of like a Wed thing. It's something, again, we don't really know, and it's going to be really intriguing once we get to that backstory, because it's such a big instance, like large character development corner right there, because they could like do stuff with Ignia, assuming Bestia is Wed's mother, do stuff with her, do stuff with Wed. It does like so much in the fact that we know that Ignia grew up in a point like where acnology was already like relatively the thing. We don't know exactly the pinpoint year when Ignia was born and acnology was running around, but I would assume Ignia probably hatched some point relatively not long, like before acnologia, but like he was probably like a dragon toddler equivalent, like he was just a hatchling at that point. Like, this is just an assumption, we don't know exactly when, but he would have relatively grown up not knowing what the dragon world was like when they were running everything, and he would have grown up in the fear of acnologia and probably grew up more like a human. So it's going to be really intriguing because we know now from him that male dragons don't raise their young, they're not involved at all. And if he's involved with Wed, it'll be really cool, because like I've talked about how he's really interesting from the fact that like it's like not all this positive stuff about Natsu and Natsu's relationship with Ignia. It's flipped negative essentially with Ignia, but we could see that potentially towards Wed, where maybe Wed was a relatively like present father. We don't know to the extent. Maybe he showed up and Wed saw him a lot. We don't really know yet, and that's one of the things that's going to be really cool once we get there. But like, if Erza can learn about Wed's actual like maybe respect and stuff for his father, but his problem maybe is something that's him, like maybe Wed's issue is nothing like that Ignia created. This is something that he personally has developed that is on him, and Erza could look at herself after the battle, and maybe once whatever Urza's progressing point for her character, maybe we get to where she has one of those like character, just very strong, clear-headed moments where she looks at Irene's situation, because she knows about Irene's like what happened to Irene that led her up everything to the point of of her kingdom being destroyed, meeting Zeref and whatnot, of why she dropped Erza off of the church. And I think if you really think about it from Erza's standpoint too, you have to really think that once this was all happening to Irene, it was before Erza was even born. And this was stuff that Irene didn't want. This was all these events that kind of she was forced to kind of just really go through after the point where they were getting involved in the war. Things just kind of really started to go downhill for her, all because of people around her and the kind of fear from acnologia. And it's like, it's kind of her fault in the long run, and like in effect, but it's not really her fault. A lot of it had to do with kind of just paranoia from the people, and it caused her to eventually lead up to where obviously she had her whole mental break, and like where she wanted to transfer her pretty much her whole existence and essence into Urza's body. And when you look at that, it's really hard for Erza to like, it's when you look at it from a standpoint of obviously like that's like from Erza, it's like if you put yourself in Urza's shoes, it's like, yeah, that was me as a baby. But it's like at the same time, you have to keep in mind you're instantly putting yourself at like ignoring everything Irene did to protect her up into this point. Obviously, it's not like Irene. Anybody that looks at those chapters, like looks at that point where Erza is like when she starts considering putting her essence into Erza. It's clear that she's not mentally sane anymore. She's clearly crazy. She's snapped, and we know once we see her as a persona enchanted into Wendy, this is her without any craziness affecting her. So like this is her most pure. So we know that she's not really evil at this point. It's more of like she was like she snapped and went insane. So, and you know, that's one of the things. It's like you always are gonna have characters like that. And it's like it's a gray area to really kind of say like how much is it their fault, how much of it is like their own responsibility. I think the thing though is like with Irene, you can't really blame her because she did everything she can up into that point, and it was just kind of this full collapse on her that really hit her. And it was a lot of stuff that other people did to her at that point, and then, you know, centuries of isolation and whatnot. It's really hard to blame her. But I think with Erza, it could be one of those things where after she finds out, maybe like Wendy talks to her and she's able to kind of put pieces together. Maybe she talks to Celine and Suzaku as well. Like maybe there's just something that leads up to where Erza kind of comes to this realization where it's like, it's not like I can't fully like say I forgive her, and but it's not her fault, and I understand what led to these events, but at the same time I'm here now and I'm grateful for what's happened in my life and got, you know, where everything has led me to now. And it's one of those things where it's like, unfortunately I can't undo the bad points in life, but bad points are, you know, they happen, and especially when there's things that aren't in somebody's control and it's just events that you are swept up in from, you know, from circumstance, like Irene obviously being her mother, Irene then obviously, you know, going crazy, not wanting to risk points where she's not sane to hurt her child, so she goes and leaves her at the Rosemary Church. And then like everything from there, it's like from that point it's like stuff that happens, you know, the Zareth cultists, everything with Ultir, and you know, it's like these are different lines that could lead up really interesting for a character. And if we get certain things like that from Wed, where Wed can kind of like look at his character and look at like everything that he's gone through, maybe talk to Erza about it, it'd be really intriguing to see these two characters and where their specific stories and like where they stand for it. Because I think it'd be really cool on top of it if like here's what I want to between them. I would love to get Erza. I want Erza to full up just I want like one more bit where like she's still fighting Wed, but I want it very clear where she's lost, where she just, there's no way she's gonna win. And then we come back and then her and Wed have one more fight, and it's like maybe an inconclusive fight, or like Wed wins but like it's clear that Urza's caught up a lot, but it's like not like a full defeat. And then they come back and they have one more fight, because it's clear right now Erza is not going to win her encounter that she's having. And I'm like, it's already going around where I'm hoping for it to kind of continue, but I would really like somewhere in between for Erza and Wed to like meet again, but not have a fight, where like it's a conversation thing, to where the next time following that where they fight, they understand each other more, and it's not to where like it's a sword match that has more weight, because these characters also understand, almost like not that they're trying to prove something for the sake of their respective, like, you know, their parent or where they're coming from, but it's more so that they're fighting knowing what the other person is fighting for, and ultimately where they're fighting for, and their stances, like knowing that like if this person wins, my, you know, and you know, for Wed, if this person wins, it's going to be like, you know, whatever's going on for them. I assume that once they get their final showdown, it's going to be like it's going to be in some scenario kind of like Azuma versus Erza, where like the winners decides some scenario that's important, that has some factor in it, like, you know, maybe that's the fight shortly before Natsu versus Ignia, and this is like something when whatever Ignia's plan is, Wed and Erza are going to be a deciding factor in some shape or form of some area. And you know, it's just those things where Ignia knows, if I win, then Fairy Tail is relatively, you know, is almost defeated, and they're not going to get this, you know, whatever this thing is, stopped. And Erza knows, if I don't defeat him, the, you know, lives are going to be at stake. Maybe like members of the guild will die. You know, there's things that it's just it's down to the wire. But at the same time, I think it'd be really cool if these characters have like a moment together where they're not fighting. Like if it's just like they get in an area where like they have a moment where they just sit down, or maybe they share conversations. Maybe like once she finds out a little bit more about Wed, she shares the story about her mother, and they, you know, they have a moment of just kind of like clarity between each other, really understanding where the other person is coming from. But at the same time, I think it'd be really cool to see if maybe that's what he'll have, where Erza, maybe he'll think of like, why didn't Erza become a dragon slayer? Why didn't you pursue anything about your mother? Or like, after finding out about her, why was that not important to you? And maybe that's where he kind of reflects on his guild. Because one thing as well, this is something I just want to add at the end that'd be really cool with Wed, and I think it'd be really cool with Fire and Flame. We don't have a lot of outside interactions with them. I'd love to get some, because it seems, you know, if they were human before, and it's not like they're like similar to the Aetherius, where the Aetherius were created, and they aren't going to really have a lot of like origin story. It's mostly going to have flashback, like stuff they've done, kind of like, you know, backstory, just because they're artificial beings. You know, they weren't grown as children and then go through events before getting powers and getting involved in events of the plot. It'd be really cool if we saw like maybe like Wed interacting with members of the guild, and in like, it's similar to how Ignia didn't only consider Dogremag a friend, and I was wondering like maybe he would consider Wed a friend, and maybe that's why Wed would be important. But no, that's a different scenario because that's his son. But would Wed maybe have interactions with his guild members, and maybe he doesn't really consider them a friend now, but at later he starts to really think about like what Erza would say about like, well, like, because it'd be like, well, maybe if once he like talks about like, well, why didn't you pursue these things X, Y, and Z, knowing your mom was this important dragon queen, blah blah, doing all that, and Urza's like, that wasn't important to me. Talks about her guild, and talks about the things that like actually got her by, and why she doesn't really pursue power like that. And it'd be really cool if like Wed does think about it and stuff that would apply, but it would only kind of make his conviction stronger. Because it like, imagine if Wed really kind of thought about what Erza said and then got back to it, and he's like, you know what, you're right. On top of like wanting to prove stuff to my father, I do care about my guild. And maybe we see stuff where like they tried to like have more fun with him, and he's just like doesn't want to talk a lot, because I would assume he wears the mask all the time. Maybe like the other characters don't know that Wed is Ignia's son, possibly, who knows. But maybe it's like one of those things where he doesn't talk a lot, and they try and talk to him, be friends with him, and it's like a, you know, he's the silent type where he only gets little bits of words out, but at the end of the day they have good interactions with him. You know, one of those things, it's like they warmed up to him, and he eventually started to kind of like have a better kind of interactions with them. But at the same time, he's like, but that only strengthens his conviction to fight for his guild. It'd be really cool to see like these two characters who, now that we know about Wed's backstory a little bit, he has ties that are similar to Erza in a lot of ways, and just how their origins are. But the difference is Wed seems to have a very strong like mental shackle about something about his dad being a dragon and him being born as a human, whereas Erza, even finding out all this stuff about Irene, Erza was still fighting for a guild, because that was at the end of the day, like her origin stuff doesn't change where she's at right now. But it'd be really cool if she could start actually really kind of taking a lot of that in, and really kind of going off of that now after talking to Wed, because it'd be something that'd be really cool to kind of, if Wed and her start talking about it, and it puts into perspective for her, where she doesn't really think about it too much. Or if like she talks to Wed, and like maybe like he says something to her and she makes retort, and Wed finds it insulting. It's like, don't you find that disrespectful, knowing like she's like, oh well, she's not like, she was my mother, but like I consider them my guild, my family. And he's like, well, doesn't that, after what you told me, isn't that disrespectful to her sacrifice? And maybe Urza's kind of like, you know, that's kind of a good point, because Erza knows. So maybe it's one of those things where she just like, she never really put a lot of depth of thought into, because she was like, you know, it happened at the time, other events have been happening. I imagine it's a sensitive topic, so she's not going to be sitting around just being like, because it's not like, oh yeah, man, I gotta go and get the batteries for my fire alarm changed out. They've been beeping and it's been bugging me the last 2 days, and I keep forgetting. It's like, yeah, this super complicated backstory of my mother who became a dragon and then gave birth to me and was gonna try and be like take over my body, and then ditched me, and then all these other things happened for over, you know, long paragraphs of events that have happened in her life. It's like, at the same time though, it's like looking at all the stuff that happened to Irene, and it was before Erza was even born. It's like, maybe she just thinks about it. It's like, yeah, but it's not something that she could have helped or something that she wanted, but she did everything she could for Erza. And there should still, and Erza has a level of respect for her, but we haven't seen Erza really go into reflection of it. And I think it'd be really valuable for her character if we get something like that. But anyway, other than that, tell me your thoughts about this interesting tie between Ignia's son and Irene's daughter, the Wed and the Erza, like coming to clash now, and hopefully a few more times I want before their fight ends, because I would love to have again an interaction between these two where maybe they put the swords down and they just sit. Maybe they, maybe they have a drink together and it's like some form of like setup where they're unable to fight and they have to have like, it's like the rest route from like the from Sirius Island, but it's some form of room that kind of like implies or automatically sets this, and they're just like Wed and them Erza don't even bother trying to fight it. It's like maybe they could, but they're just like, you know what, I actually want to talk to this guy, because it'd be really cool if they both find each other more fascinating, besides like Erza being like, this is a guy I have to fight and stop, and Wed being like, this is somebody I want to fight for the sake of my swordsmanship level. Because it's cool that like we have a character like this, because we haven't really had much for it, but at the same time it'd be much more intriguing and enticing for their characters if they, we went and do something like this, where it's like this weird, it's like something that we didn't really think about until literally this last chapter. Anyway, other than that, talking to you guys in the next one. I don't want to ramble on for too long. Bye.